floor over to you.
Well, like you said, I am Steve Hall. I am a state representative in the 18th district. For those that don't know me a little bit more, I've lived here in Knoxville all my life. We'll be married for 40 years in October. Have 5 kids, 5 grandkids who all live in Knox County. I own a small construction company called Interior Finishes, which do commercial tenant build-outs. I've not really done a whole lot of business as of late. When the economy went down, I said, well, I think I'll just sit back and wait for it to come back, which it hasn't yet. In the construction business, for those who don't know, it's a risky business in good times. You know, we've got a saying in the construction business, getting to work and doing the work is the easy part. It's getting paid is the hard part.
Amen.
But one of the reasons I went to Nashville is to try to look out for government's overreaching hand into our lives. That's one of the things that really concerns me, and it dwells a lot into property rights and personal rights and just cutting red tape on business people. By being a small businessman, it's overwhelming, the amount of duplication of one form that you have to fill out, and then you fill out another form that's exactly the same thing, except it just goes to another department. To try to streamline government, to make it more efficient, to cut down on a lot of the red tape, and to just get the government out of our lives. You know, I ran for city council, served 2 terms, and probably, I guess 70% of the district that I represent still was my city council district. And people, and under Mayor Ash, he used to always try to bargain with you to get you to vote for something that you may or may not want to bargain to vote for. But he would say, well, what does your district want? What do you need out there? And my response to him, the 2 times that he asked me that question, is people in my district want the government to leave them alone, keep taxes as low as they possibly can, and do the few services that they need the government to provide. And that's the philosophy that I've tried to take to Nashville. Keep government as small as we possibly can. Keep our dollars in our pocket. Let us decide how we're going to spend them. We don't need the government. You don't need me telling you how to spend your money. You ought to be able to do that for yourself. And that's a philosophy I went to Nashville with. That's a philosophy I tell everybody when I knock on their door and meet them and talk to them on the phone, you know, that I'll listen to anything you got to say, anybody. And now I may disagree with it, but usually people that I disagree with, we disagree on friendly terms. We're not angry at each other. You know, there's very few things that I have a real firm stance on, but some of those are, you know, I don't want the government intruding into our lives. In the city government, which y'all have ran into, some of y'all have experienced recently with the MPC, they have a philosophy about property rights, that the property is yours until we want it. That's their philosophy on property rights. Now, they may not come out and say it quite that bluntly, but that's it. If you have a piece of property that the government wants, they're going to figure out a way to get it. And whether you want to give it to them or not. And most of the time, people don't. There are groups of people in this city, and I know about this city firsthand. There were some of the blighted property ordinances they've had. They went out and they've taken older people's property because they come at it in such a way that, well, it needs painting. So if it needs painting, it's got to be condemned, because it's, you know, they don't come along like we would think that they should and say, well, your house needs painting, we will help you get this done. They come along with the attitude is you do it, and if you don't do it or something, within 4 or 5 days, we're going to start fining you $50 a day. And most people, if they've got a problem like that, they know of it, they know about it. And the reason they probably don't have it fixed, they can't afford to. And we don't need the government coming along and stepping in and saying, you know, we're going to take your property and threatening you and putting you under more of a stress and more of a financial burden than you already are. But they're doing that right here in the city of Knoxville right now, and have been. And they're doing it all across the state. You know, that's one of the things, if I'm fortunate enough to go back to the legislature, I've been doing a lot of investigating. There is no definition of what blight is in the state of Tennessee. It's very subjective. I can say something's blighted just because I just don't like it. And they're using that, so if I'm fortunate enough to go back, I hope to get a good definition of what blight is. And because right now it's so subjective that a couple of people say, no, that's blighted, so we need to take it because you are not going to do it. And well, the way they do this, it's not quite as blatant as I just described it, but they come out and they say, well, you need to do this. You need to cut these trees and stuff, and you need to do this, and you need to do that. And they keep adding, and you do one thing, and then they come along and they find something else. So, you know, and they just get so they overwhelm people who are probably some of the most vulnerable citizens we have, which are elderly more than anybody, or poor, you know, just because it doesn't meet a standard which they think they want to apply to everybody. So that's some of the things. I serve on 2 committees. All the so-called freshmen, that's all they put them on, was 2 committees and no subcommittees. And one of them I serve on is the government operations. And that committee is, I describe it as being the weakest committee in the state house. And what I mean by that is all the rules and regulations that govern all the boards or any laws that we pass. And when we pass a law, it doesn't necessarily come out and be enforced or get applied with the intent which we had when we passed it, because it goes to the bureaucrats and then they determine how it's going to be enforced, say. And they come out with all these rules and regulations. Well, government ops reviews all those rules and regulations. And that makes it sound like it's a real powerful committee, but government operations can't kill anything. They can't change anything. We just hear it. The biggest thing we can do to it is stay it for like 90 days. And usually when we do stay in some issue, they will come back and modify it somewhat. But typically it's a very weak committee. And then I serve on the weakest and I serve on the most powerful committee in the House. That's the Finance Committee. And that one, anything that costs any money comes in front of that committee. And we kill a lot of things that a lot of us think are useless, that cost citizens money. You know, it's citizens' dollars. People, when they get elected, they have a tendency to think that it's not our money, which it is. You know, they have a tendency to say, well, when they'll start talking, you'll hear them start talking, well, this is federal dollars, so it doesn't cost us anything. Yes, it does cost us something.
We're paying it.
We're paying it. So, you know, it's a good committee to keep things on track, keep us in line budget-wise, and to, I won't say eliminate wasting money, but we cut a lot of it. You know, we're still spending a lot of money in the state of Tennessee that don't need to be spent. But there are several of us on this committee that are bringing things to their attention and questioning things that used to just sail through. So that's pretty much what I've been doing in a nutshell. So, any questions?
I don't.
Okay.
Is there any legislation that you have in your back pocket should you get reelected for January?
There is, I'm working on one to deal with the MPC. I don't know exactly how to word that. I mean, one, definitely I want to see implemented, and there's 2 or 3, and it's not just me, there's 2 or 3 other, Becky Massey has got a group that are sort of looking at it to, is my understanding, to at least in some of these provisions to make all of their decisions appealable to, I would prefer it to be appealable to county commission or city council and then to a court. You know, but right now there are some things which we learned some about a couple of Saturdays ago that maybe aren't even appealable to a court. So
That's right, they can make decisions with no accountability.
So that's one thing I'm looking at. I have a constituent, I really hadn't dug into this one a whole lot. I have a constituent that's very concerned about, you know, on real estate foreclosure, real estate paperwork that you sign when you're buying a house. You have to sign a disclosure saying it does or it does not have lead-based paint and several other things that are on this disclosure. What she is complaining about, she has bought a house that they had a meth lab in. That's not something you have to legally disclose.
That's not on the disclosure.
And that is something that will, can cost you $30,000, $40,000 to fix, just to clean it up. And I actually think that's something that should be there.
Yeah.
That if it's ever been a meth lab or any manufacturer of any illegal drugs. That's a couple of them. I'm one of these people, I think we've got enough laws. We need to work on the ones we've got.
Too many. Get
Yes.
rid of a bunch of them.
Get rid of a bunch of them. Some we need to fix. No. Yes, ma'am.
Well, regarding the meth lab, isn't there, I mean, don't they have to disclose if illegal activities went on in there?
It's my understanding they don't.
Because in other states where I live, it all, I mean, you even have to disclose if somebody died in that house.
There are lots of things you have to disclose, and there's a list of them. But I'm told that, because I've asked the question, do you have to? And they say no. You know, and because of the real estate industry's got so much of this paperwork already printed up, it'd be something that have to be phased in because they don't want to, or maybe just add another little piece that you understand this. But it's my understanding you don't have to disclose that it's been a meth lab at one point in time. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I understand we're supposed to be, you all get reelected, supposed to be voting on a new House Speaker.
Yes.
Would you please put Judd Matheny in there, please?
You know, lots of people have asked me that, and he's gotten a lot of press that he's going to run.
Yeah.
Judd Matheny, who I know very well, has never mentioned that to me that he wants to be Speaker.
Okay.
He's never mentioned it to any other legislator that I've talked to that he wanted to be Speaker. And I've talked to, you know, when we're all running for re-election, we all talk, and I've probably talked to 25 or 30 of them in the last month. And I've asked that question. They said he hasn't even asked yet to vote for him for Speaker. I would have thought that in this late date he would be putting some feelers out. But I like Judd, and it really depends on whether he thinks he's got a shot at it. And I think that could be why he hadn't mentioned it to anybody. Yes, sir.
Change subject, have you determined what the nationalization of healthcare is going to cost you as a businessman?
Well,
can a person figure it out yet?
no. I don't, that's what I was going to say. I don't think you can figure it out. I have been to meetings and talked about it. It's very complicated. I've talked to, you know, there for a while I thought we needed to have to get into a compact. The state of Tennessee should. Now I'm looking more at it that maybe we shouldn't, because they tell me, and I've got some people sending me some information about it. What they tell me is that there's one or two sections of it that state that if you if Tennessee set up a healthcare compact, that would make them subject to the fine, the penalty, if a business owner didn't provide health care insurance, whereas if we don't do anything and leave it alone and just accept Obamacare, which I'm hoping that Obama's not the president and we don't even have to worry about it.
It's never gonna be repealed.
But if we leave it
It's not a federal government.
at the federal level, right now, we don't have that, the penalty is not in there, or so I've been told.
You've got the 10th Amendment.
Yeah, so, I mean, so can I ask
Sure.
a follow-up question about that? So as a state rep, where do you stand on the 10th Amendment? Tennessee saying, you know what, we're just.
I really think that
And
we
and
should.
if you come after our citizens, we're gonna go after you.
I think we should do that, but what will happen is like, in my opinion, we voted in the state house to just ask the governor to, on Agenda 21, just to sign a proclamation that we had, a proclamation is not right, a resolution, you know, and we couldn't even get him to do that.
It's not even binding.
A non-binding thing. So, I don't know. You know, I'm a firm believer in the 10th Amendment. I think that states' rights should be something that we uphold. But I don't necessarily think that there's probably, there may be 30 of us in the House out of 99 that think that. Maybe a few more, that would stand up and fight that, for that.
Thank you.
Steve, is there any way that we could get some traction of legislation to take the Attorney General for the state and make him an electable office rather than an appointee? Because he is blocking us from joining the lawsuit against Obamacare.
Right.
And the 10th Amendment being practiced.
They told me from some people, I know Frank Nicely's a big, and Senator Campfield, who's sitting right back there, who
Yes.
make it
Thank you,
address that,
Senator.
are big proponents of trying to do that. They tell me that they probably can't elect the way there's something in the Constitution. If I mess this up, he can correct me. That we probably need to maybe look at maybe a Solicitor General or somebody else with another title and give him, and elect him and give him all of those powers and
Yes.
make the Attorney General just limit what he can do.
Yeah.
Did I say that about right, or?
Well, we tried that last year. That was my bill last year. And we didn't have the votes to get out of Senate Judiciary Committee. So, would like to, love to.
Yeah.
We also tried to do a constitutional amendment to say it's an elected position. Didn't have the votes to get that out either.
Yeah.
Okay, how about school
How
superintendents?
can we help you get that done?
Well,
Like more conservatives that support it. I mean, honestly, most people don't know that issue. I mean, you guys hear what I like to call, you are the 1%.
Yeah.
You're the 1% because you're educated on the issues. And you understand these issues and you know these issues. 99% of the people, if you talk to them, what's the Attorney General do? They don't have a clue.
Yeah.
1% of the population does. Everybody else is Joe Sixpack. They just don't, it doesn't click to them. It's an issue that matters to them. It resonates with them.
it's the same thing about electing judges.
Yeah.
The Constitution says that they shall be elected Supreme Court justices and all these folks. And, there is, in the process of being a constitutional amendment put in to more or less say that the way we do it now is okay. It's modified, it's more of a version of the federal government, but it's still the
How's
government.
that
that's
working
going
for us now?
Yeah. But that's what's going. I mean, I voted against it. It will have to come up again. And it didn't pass the House by that great a margin. It did pass, but it has to come up again next year or in this next session. And it'll have to go, I think it's 2/3 will have to vote for it. So it didn't get that big of a margin when it went in.
Okay, this is for really both of you. Is there any chance that we can turn it back to electing our school superintendents? Especially since McIntyre in Knoxville was paid $222,000 $1,800 a year plus $800 a month for car expenses. He came out of Eli Broad training, and Eli Broad is funded by Bill and Melinda Gates and the Motts Foundation. So what we've got in there is a guy that is deliberately dumbing down our children and shoving charter schools and destroying what little is left of the government schools we have now that's academic. It's all going into dog training. So we need to get back to being able to elect these people and educate the electorate on what these folks are really doing. And he was, of course, put in there by Haslam.
Well, I think there are several of us in the legislature that would love to see superintendents be elected. But, you know, there's bills come up every year to do that, and they don't go anywhere. You know, Senator Campfield brings one of those up. Frank Nicely brings one up.
And Frank carried it in the House, I carried it in the Senate, and they got, I think 2 votes in the Senate committee, and mine was one of them.
And it was a mild bill, really. What it said was
watered down.
It was watered down. It said that we would give county commission the option to elect a superintendent. Didn't say they had to, just gave them the option if they wanted to. And it couldn't even get it passed.
It was not even farther than that. It was county commission had the option to put it on the ballot to allow the voters to decide if they wanted it.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
that couldn't pass.
it was pretty watered down, and it wouldn't get any traction at all.
So what we need to do is to get all these groups across the state and do like Alabama did. And when these bills that you guys are putting in come up for vote, we need to phone call to where there's hundreds of phone calls a day going in there to push them to do what we want, like they did in Alabama to get the governor to sign.
What I would love to see on that, I don't mean to take away from you guys' time at all. One thing I would just love to see, if you really want to make a difference, one thing Tennessee desperately, desperately needs is someone who will score legislators based on how they vote conservatively or not conservatively.
Bingo.
There is no organization, the left doesn't. There's pro-life scores on how they vote, NRA scores on how you vote for gun bills. But if you vote for educational standards or something like that, you want something like that, electability standards or taxation, there's no one who scores legislators on how they vote on taxation. So therefore, everybody comes election time, they'll go say, I'm conservative, I'm conservative, I'm conservative.
Yeah.
And the 99% who don't know any better, who don't study the issues goes, well, he said he's conservative, he must be conservative, I'll vote for him.
Yeah.
And the same people get elected, and they're not conservative.
Let me just say one quick thing about that. One thing that I pushed for when I was campaigning is school choice. We have to, the real answer to that is not just the superintendent. That's part of the problem. But we should be able to have school choice. Not charter schools, but families should be able to have the option to choose where they want to send their children to. And that's what we don't have in Tennessee. Well, that's what we don't have in America. We have a government bureaucracy that dictates, along with all of these other problems, that comes from the Department of Education.
You're going to see that change, I suspect. I was just at the RNC convention, and that was one of the things almost every speaker,
Condoleezza Rice definitely talked about it.
Condoleezza was one of about 3 or 4 that talked about it. A lot of it wasn't televised, but 3 or 4 different people talked about vouchers and getting people out of failing schools and getting them into successful schools where they can become a success. That was something really pushed hard. That was probably one of the top 3 issues I saw pushed at the convention. There's legislation for it this year. I think you're going to see a move in that direction this year. Maybe not as grandiose as some like, but I think we're going to see a move.
You know, I'd be really, really upset if that happened because this governor already lifted the moratorium on charter schools. Charter schools' choice and vouchers are backed by Obama, Arnie Duncan, the CFR, and the Heritage Foundation, which I connected right to the United Nations. They are very tied to the UN.
Well, the reason they're connected is because the federal government will still have control of the curriculum.
No, that's not the reason.
Well, that's part of it.
Let me tell you what the deal is. if you allow federal money to fund private or charter schools, that federal money will control that school,
It's money.
and the end result is the elimination of any choice because it will all be run by the feds.
No, not run by federal.
Yes, it will.
Yeah, I'm not saying it is funded with federal money.
They all are.
It is now, but that's where the problem is. We don't want it funded at the federal level. That's where the problem is.
We have choice now that isn't funded by the federal level. If you go with vouchers, vouchers come from the feds. It's our tax money. The vouchers go to the school of your choice, and then they are federally overseen.
Let me ask a dumb question, because that's kind of an arena I get confused on. I understand the connections, but I don't think there's anything worse than government schools, period.
Oh, there is.
Charter
Charter schools actually, like in Indianapolis, are run by Eli Lilly. That's PPPs again, public-private partnerships, okay? That's.
So where's our answer? What I'm
Our
hearing is there
answer
is no
is-
answer to
Yes,
good education.
yes, there is. We want to keep them out of the private schools. We want to keep them out of homeschooling. You know this, did you see the article in Saturday's paper?
I got no
where it
problem with
said-
that.
Where it said the virtual schools in Union, the one representative was all upset because they were losing money and the scores were dropping and everything. Those virtual schools are government public school education coming into the home with the computer, where there's nothing between the child and the computer. It's a perfect propaganda machine. Here's the thing, that's what they want in the end result with Agenda 21. They want all the kids in a stack 'em and pack 'em with education with the computer. The computer is the death knell of real direct instruction, not the phony direct instruction that's dog training that we have in all southern schools now.
But what you have, at least that way, it's a step closer to a free market solution. It may not be completely free market, but it's a step closer. If you go to a public school now, it's 100%. There is no division
Choice and
between,
competition.
Yeah.
there's no competition, there's no choice whatsoever. It's 100% government.
That's why
And
we
then we
don't.
can work on breaking the connections of that, because that, to me, the whole Department of Education needs to go away.
Yes.
And if we can
Yeah,
break the
thank
connection,
you, Reagan, for not doing it, right?
there's,
Well, it wasn't Reagan, it was Congress, because he was
No,
pushing
no,
for
it was Reagan, because Reagan signed in 85 and 88 the US-Soviet education agreement that brought in the Skinnerian behavioral training, training our kids like dogs, 85 and 88. Eisenhower started it in 58.
yeah,
So
it all
we've had
began
this
in the
crap
20s with
for
Wilson,
years.
so, I mean, you know, we can go back forever, but you're not gonna immediately change things, and if we get an educated public understanding more of the issues, we can begin
Yeah,
to
but we
move.
don't want to play into
I
their
kind of
hands.
agree with you not to let them into private schools and
No.
into
And
homeschooling.
if the and I understand
Get them
where-
out of every other school, if you let them into everything,
Yeah,
then
you
you
gotta
can't
work to
rid
get
of
them out, not allow them to come into all of the private.
Okay.
You don't have to, you don't have to. Depends on how the charter, how vouchers are set up. They can be like, here's $1, here's whatever, X number of dollars. The kid decides the parent decides where the kid's gonna go.
Whose dollar is that?
It's the taxpayer dollar,
Yeah, but who funds it?
the taxpayer.
No, who passes it out to the person who wants to do a choice?
The government does through the taxpayer, but the taxpayer, it's up to the school to decide if they wanna accept it or not.
No, that can only be, state money, right?
What can only be state money?
No,
These
it's federal
vouchers.
money.
It's federal money.
There may be some tie through, but I think most of this, state, I believe most of our money comes from the state. Some of it's local.
Well, it's supposed to be state
Oh,
money,
God.
but it's actually a combination of both. Because
Probably is, it's probably.
when you pay your taxes on your home, part of your taxes go to the school. Okay, now the state should be able to control that. However, because the state doesn't want to pick up the whole funding, the federal comes in with the federal money, and the federal, and puts a, quote, if you're gonna take our money, you have to teach this kind of curriculum. And that's what the problem is. We have everybody else in government telling what to teach our kids and how to teach our kids. when.
Well, it's up to the private businesses and the parents to say, we're not accepting that.
Well,
Or we won't
that's
send
why-
our kid there.
Right, well, that's why the homeschooling thing is taking off with a lot of people, because they don't want a padlocked dog with a trained bell having them salivate, okay? That's not training, that's not giving someone.
That is training.
It's not the kind of
It's not
training we want.
academics.
We want people to be able to take any kind of a situation and find a creative, reasonable, logical step to overcome whatever obstacles put in front of you,
I'm with you.
okay? But that comes through creative teaching, comes through hard facts like math tables, algebra, calculus.
But where are you getting that? Are you getting it at the public schools now? You getting that kind of training at the public schools now?
No,
Well, then why would you want to stick with that system? That is the only platform that we can use.
let's see, I'll give you a case in point. In Apollo 13, when they had, the command module had the explosion with the oxygen tank.
And I'm sorry, I shouldn't, this is their hour, I
No,
shouldn't
go
even
ahead.
talk about
It's all
this.
right.
But anyway, to make a long story short, if you ever watched that movie, none of them had calculators at mission control. They said, how long have they got with this kind of bleed off? Everyone picked up their slide rule, boop, boop, boop. This guy's got 5 minutes left if we don't shut it down now. And they'll be dead. They didn't have a computer. They did it all in their head with a slide rule. Done. Okay, we don't have that capability now. Our kids coming out of school now can't even do long-term math problems and show how they come to the
Why would you want kids
answer.
going to that school?
Because it's a government school and people don't care.
Well, why would you want to keep funding that system then?
I don't. That's what this whole thing's all
All
about.
right, then let's give it to somebody else.
Let's take this offline and get to the meeting, and
Okay.
we'll talk after the meeting.
Yeah,
All
that's
right.
fine, this is their,
Okay,
We got lots of stuff. to
Okay.
go.
this is their show.
So
But anyway.
education's clearly an issue.
Education is clearly an issue. All right, let's switch over to, thank you, Steve. That was really exciting. And we got
If you
going
can
here.
vote for Steve Hall, vote, push the button.
All right. Okay.
I don't need to get excited about this, but it's an area I've really researched for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And I will tell you that where charter schools are, they eliminate the school board, so there's no more community input.
Right.
Why did we fight the Revolutionary War? Taxation without representation. And that's what they're working towards. And if you read the quotes of the people that are pushing this, it's obvious what they want and what their goals are. We can't have it with federal money.
Brother, could you hold that book up for everybody to see?
Oh, yes.
This book was written by Charlotte Isabey. It's called The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. Everybody should get a copy of this.
It's online free.
It's online free.
Really?
Yeah, there's
Yes,
a
it
PDF
is.
version online.
Yes, it's on deliberatedumbingdown.com. You can download the whole thing and read it. This is the new version. It has 16 new pages in the front, but the one online is the 1999 version, but it's got everything.
I'm trying to decide if I want to be
This
the
is all-
dumb kid or the angry nationalist kid.
Yes. Okay, okay, our other guest tonight is Kermit Steck. And Kermit, you are running as an independent on the Constitutional Party?
I'm running as Constitution Party
Yes.
candidate
Okay.
for U.S. Senate. And
Okay.
as of Thursday, you can go to the State Elections Commission website and you can see that I'm really a valid candidate. I'm not just some guy off the street saying I'm a real candidate for the Senate. After 4.5 years of fighting in the court system, and after 4 months of our state attorney general putting up an argument that we don't need to be on the ballot, we have ballot access. So, one of the things I have for both you gentlemen, I'm gonna kind of put you on the spot here, is we were talking about some of the education systems, and you're in the finance system, and I can't seem to get a straight answer anywhere about Governor Haslam's appointment of Samar Ali. Can you guys give me some insight into what's going on that, or do you have any idea on what's going on that? And you know, we hear all kinds of little rumors out here that she's a Islamic fundamentalist, that she's a Sharia compliance advisor to the governor and stuff. What do you guys hear?
I've never met her. I mean, the first time I heard her name was when you know, like most of the people here in this room did, about how that she was an expert in Sharia finance and all that stuff. I've never met her, never heard anything about her.
I've never met her, never heard anything about her, other than what you guys have probably read. I've read the same thing you guys have probably read about her.
Obama appointee.
I've read
Well,
the
that's,
same thing.
that's one of the things that I have a question about too, is, if I'm not mistaken, Sharia law is a component of Islam.
Yes, it is,
And
absolutely.
if our governments, whether it be local, state, or national, are leaning toward that direction of going along into that realm of endorsing a religion, isn't that going against the Supreme Court decision about separating church and state?
Absolutely.
My understanding, and this is just what I have read from the same things you guys have, is she is knowledgeable in that, but she is not advocating that.
Understand?
I'm curious.
I'm not putting you on the spot,
I'm not taking her position, I'm just saying,
No,
this is
I'm
what I
not
heard.
trying to put you on the spot, I'm just saying this is becoming a real hot button issue, and it's gonna be.
I would just
And,
like to hear a definition of exactly what is Sharia compliant finance.
Very
What the hell
simple,
does that mean?
very simple. I'll give you a quick education on that.
Compliance with the Quran, right?
It has to comply with the Quran. Actually, the Quran is built around Sharia law.
Right.
Sharia law is basically an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And
Okay, but put it into the financial world. I've done a lot of
Okay.
studies on
But
that.
if you want Islamic's money, you need to be Sharia compliant, or they're not gonna do business with you.
In all other areas?
But you're
Or
not
just,
allowed.
I mean, if it means honest,
Money.
fair dealings, which I doubt, but if that's what it means, I don't give a dang what you call
It's
it.
about the
But if
interest.
it's
Sharia-
inculcating,
Sharia compliant
Charging
law
interest.
has to do with if you are going to set up a financial institution inside a Muslim country.
okay,
Okay, if you are a bank and you want to set up business in a Muslim country, you are financing, when you pay interest out on an account at any bank, okay, investment firm, whatever, a portion of that money goes to fund what you would call Sharia or a
okay, you're
Islamic,
funding the religion,
You're
some
funding the
charity,
religion.
some,
okay, could go to a terrorist cell, could go to a type of a religious propagation cell, whatever. You have no control over it. That is done by the local Muslim government,
enough said.
okay? And that's, yes, ma'am.
The other thing is any kind of institution that is Sharia compliant cannot be involved in anything to do with the pork industry, with the alcohol industry,
Or
with anything.
Judaism.
Correct, anything that, yeah,
You
anything
can't do
that
business with
is
anybody
Islam.
else who
Correct.
is not Sharia compliant.
correct.
That's
So
right.
all that affects their portfolios, though, of what businesses they allow investments into. So the
Okay.
control is ultimate.
Okay, but see, it's really a hypocritical stance, because if there is a medical advance and a Jewish doctor did it, then they should divulge themselves from practicing that medical operation, but they don't. They're willing to accept it if it'll heal their people. But at the same token, Israel is Satan, and the United States is the great Satan. So when you finally put it all into, it's nothing but hypocrisy in a massive, massive scale. All right? All right, go ahead.
Thank you for tolerating these interferences so well.
No, that's fine. I'd rather have a kind of a discussion. I'm a big advocate. I was just listening before I came in here on the Democratic National Convention, and they were pushing, the mayor of New Jersey was pushing and touting how the same basic philosophy that the Republican Party has now, that they're pushing for tax cuts, they're pushing for small business breaks, they're pushing for more jobs. And it's like, isn't that amazing, 60 days before the election, all of a sudden, all these things are switching around.
And Mitt Romney's Thomas Jefferson.
But, they were talking about what the president's doing, more he's doubled the Pell Grants. Well, where does grant money come from? Us. We are 31st of the nations in the world. We are ranked 31st in education. Now, we're back to, I hate to bring this back up again, but my opinion about the federal education system is it doesn't need reformed, it needs abolished. And one of the ways that we can do this, one of the things that I would like to see done, are you all familiar with the 17th Amendment?
Yes.
I'd like to see it repealed. Let me give you a real quick short history of how did it come about. Why would the state governments give up control of the senators that control the federal government? We would not have Obamacare if the state senators, the federal senators worked for you guys, because you'd send them up and then say, if you vote for this, you're going to lose your job. Am I correct or not?
Absolutely.
And I've talked to Frank nicely about this before, and I've talked to 3 or 4 other state senators along this line. But the reason it came about was because of party politics in the year 1913. In the progressive era, when lots of other things were becoming more progressive too. Well, they did not seat their federal senators for over a year. Well, people got fed up with it, and somebody thought, well, they came up with a brainstorm. Oh, I know how we can get more power. Let's push for the idea of them being elected, just like the state representatives. Well, what that did was it completely did away with the original intent of the founders. The founders had a 2-tier control. It wasn't just the lateral checks and balances of the federal government. It was an up and down, a vertical check on the government. The states could not, were in control of their federal senators, and the people were in control of the state representatives. And then when they went to government, they said, this is what wants to happen. The states controlled the senators, and the people controlled the state representatives that went to the national level. Forgive me for using that term, but just like you guys are part-time politicians. You're citizens the rest of the time. I think that was the intent anyway. But now we have 1,400 federal agencies. How many state agencies do we have? So we have this, you were talking about the redundancy in the state house. Well, it's multiple duplicated in the federal, and then it's pushed down here. We don't, one of the ways we control this stuff, I said I was going to talk about faith, family, and finance. Well, I forgot the 4th one, which is freedom, which I took an oath to the Constitution because I'm a veteran.
Amen.
I'm a veteran. I was an enlisted man who took an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to obey the orders of the officers appointed over me, the Constitution, and the President. Well, when I became an officer after going to officer candidate school, I took an oath to uphold the Constitution, period. Period. Not the President, not anybody else, all enemies, foreign and domestic. I did my time overseas, now it's time to come back and say, we have enemies against the Constitution in our own government. And they want to stand there and call me a potential domestic terrorist threat?
Yes.
It's like, what insanity have we reached?
We're all on the list.
I'm done. I'm over this. You can call me whatever you want. But it's our Constitution, and it's the way we're supposed to rule. We take the senators back, we bring them back, and what we do is we put this caveat on there, repeal the 17th Amendment, and if they don't put their representatives, the senators, in there within 60 days by appointment of the House of Representatives, or correction, the state representatives and the state senators, we fire them. We have a recall vote, or ouster as it's called in Tennessee. In 60 days, you shoot them down, you send them away, and you elect a whole new House and a whole new Senate and say, do it now, do it, now, do it. And if you don't do it, we'll fire you. Replace them. You'll never get it passed. I'm like, I bet we can. Yes, ma'am.
How are you going to go about it?
How are we going to go about it? We go around it just like this. First thing, you get somebody elected that's willing to stand up and start yelling this stuff, and then the grassroots organizations go to work, and they go to gentlemen like this, and they go to the state representatives or the national representatives. It only took about a year to pass this in 1913. It won't take much more than a year to pass this in 2013. That's how we do it. And don't tell me we don't have the funding to go to go to the media. I don't give a flying flip about mass media. There's Facebook, there's emails, there's a telephone, there's the social media. If we can have an Arab Spring because of Facebook, we can have a national uprising in the United States on Election Day. If every Christian, if every professing Bible-believing Christian came out and voted on principles, biblical principles, we would have a transformation of this government literally overnight in one day. Election day. If we will go back to our foundational principles, there's a thing called the Constitution, and I just got through going through, Jeff Cobble teaches a course. Jeff is an attorney in Greenville, Tennessee, that teaches a course on the Institute on the Constitution, and it's 12 weeks long. This is the course. I didn't go through it just once, I went through it twice. Now, Jeff has an organization, and I belong to that organization. I'm actually on the board of directors of that organization, and it's called Reclaiming America's First Principles. And we deal with issues from state level and national level. And I believe Senator Canfield's probably got a few phone calls possibly from them and talked with them about some of these issues going on, or CM Cobble or some of the other folks up in there.
I just walked in, I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. I was talking about an organization called Reclaiming America's First Principles, RAFP.
Sorry. Sorry, I was just answering the phone call.
We were talking about repealing the 17th Amendment, and the way we can do this and make it effective so that we don't have this party politics going on is we put an addendum on this, and we tell the people that if the state houses do not seat their senators within 60 days, we have an ouster. We have a recall vote, and we replace the entire state General Assembly. And that will force them to put somebody in that office.
And you're going to pass this through the General Assembly?
I'm going to pass this through whatever it takes. It'll have to be, sure, why not? Because if it doesn't pass this time, then maybe we just do a little list of this conservative bill voting score organization, and I know just the guys that can implement this thing right now, and we'll start voting on that, and we'll keep track of who's voted how on each one of these things, and we'll vote them out of office.
And we'll publish it.
And we'll publish it, because we'll go ahead and do this.
Please do.
And
I'm on for you. I'm advocating.
yeah, I know you are. I know you
are.
Again, I talked to different state representatives about this, and they said we can't get the senators to pay attention to what the state wants. You know, and that's one of the things that I'd like to see done. One of the other things I'd like to see done is audit the Fed.
Yes.
And because when you see the audit of the Fed, you're going to get so mad there won't be any Fed anymore, because people will demand its demise. I don't think it's constitutional anyway. But those are a couple of the things I'd like to see done. I'd like to see the education system all the way back down to state level. We don't have a funding problem. We have a spending problem.
Amen.
You know, we don't have a funding problem in the state, am I correct? Don't we have a balanced budget requirement? And how about a couple of gentlemen by the name of Christie and Walker, two governors that have recently taken their states and got their governments back under control? Well, if they can do it in their states, maybe we need to take a look at what they did right in order to do this. And if not at each state level, maybe we need to look at this at the national level. But we have gotten so crazy about power and who's in charge that these things need to be cut down and pared back. And you on the Finance Committee, sir, we may not be able to get rid of Obamacare one way, but we can do it another way. Zero funding. And that'll kill it, won't it? If you can't get rid of it legislatively, you kill it financially. You choke it to death by giving it no money.
Well, see, that's the thing I've always said. They can do that now at the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives funds things.
You are absolutely
and
right.
they may be using this for an election tool to get more Republicans elected. But, you know, I said right now they can just defund it. Say the funding is zero, and therefore we're not going to fund Obamacare at the end.
See,
But I think they're really using it for an election tool because they know people hate it so bad they're all going to turn out in droves, and if it's already defunded, they're not going to turn out in droves.
Well, and that's another thing, is getting people out to vote. Now, historically, when you look at the number of people that turn out and vote, It's what, 25, 30%, maybe 40% of election year of the possible registered voters. We have to get people to come out and vote. And I understand the apathy, and I understand the sense of hopelessness that a lot of them have. But I'd like to see this country fundamentally transformed too. But not the way he's been talking about it. You know, what he's done, and I think people have woke up and started seeing. It's just like what's taking place in the Democratic Party and the election in the state of Tennessee's primary about their Senate candidate. He got 2/3 of the votes in the Democratic Party, and they want nothing to do with him in the Democratic leadership. Now, what's that saying, folks? Now, do you think some of these Democrats have decided to wake up and say, whoa, whoa, I'm not only conservative, I'm constitutionally minded. Everything that we do is based on the Constitution. That's why it's a Constitution party. I was a Republican for 33 years. And I didn't see the transformation taking place that I was promised over and over and over again. And finally said, I'm done. Principles, George Washington warned us in his farewell address, do not get caught up in party politics. That's what's happened. People say a third party can't win. Well, let me refresh your memory. In somewhere around the year 1850, within 3 election cycles, there was a new political party that splintered off of the old Whig Party. It's called the Republican Party. Well, if we did it once, we can do it again. And we have the mass media available to us, not the CBS and ABC and CNN and all the rest, but it's the social media on the internet. It's your local ties to your friends. People say, well, how are we going to get the word out about you? You don't have any funding. Well, you're going to do it for me, I hope. Yeah. You know, there's literature back there. There's some DVDs. Take those and look at them. You can go to Kermit Steck for U.S. Senate on Facebook, and you can link to those videos that are on YouTube, and you can pull them up and see where I stand on some of these issues. But you know, if we don't get a handle on this real quick, we have a whole bunch of European models of economics that we're getting ready to go down the road fast and furious on. We are getting ready to go down that road. Socialism, there's a lady, if you'll pardon me for a minute, she is an economist. Her name is, I'll have to pull it up because she is from, her name is Dembisa Mayo. And she says that if nothing else changes from its current path, it's almost certain that America will move from a fully fledged capitalist society of entrepreneurs to a socialist nation in just a few decades. She is also, she's from Nigeria. She studied at Harvard. She's been on a lot of, I believe she was in, she's got a master's degree from Washington, D.C.'s American University, a doctorate of economics from Oxford, a master's at Harvard. She's worked for World Bank and had nearly a decade at Goldman Sachs. And she also made this startling comment and said she expected it to be taken very badly, but she says that because of the way the West has handed out welfare to Africa, it is nearly ruined the continent of Africa.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because
By design, yeah.
Because it doesn't teach the people how to be self-sufficient, just like the Soviet model didn't teach people how to be self-sufficient. One of the things they taught us as an armor officer, as a combat arms officer, is to realize that the Soviet military, the way they operated, you could not show any initiative as a young officer, as an NCO. They didn't want you to have any initiative whatsoever. Right. So if you could kill the commanders, if you could kill their communication system, they would stay put for not so much fear of the enemy overwhelming them as what their leaders would do to them if they did some initiative. Stalin purged 100,000 military officers at the beginning of the Second World War, or just prior to it, because he didn't want it. Mao Zedong did the same thing. The Khmer Rouge did similar things, right? Pol Pot.
Yeah.
We accept and we want initiative. The school systems are not promoting that. We talked about this. When was the last time that they learned to be problem solvers? When was the last time they were thought to have critical thinking skills? I'm a product of the public school system. I didn't learn these things because I learned it at the grade level. I learned it through a combination of things. One of them was that I have a fascination with why people do the things they do. That's why my degree's in psychology. And I want to know what makes things tick. But I'm a history person too. I want to know why things went awry. I'm reading a book called Hitler's Cross. And I understand, I'm beginning to get a grip on how did the church not stand up against Adolf Hitler. Because they were taught for generations. One of the things that they were taught for generations was there's a separation between my personal morality and societal morality. If you can separate the two and say what I do in my own personal time is separate than what I do in my professional time, then we're okay. And just because something is legal doesn't make it moral. Abortion is a perfect example of that. But Americans believe things are right and we're supposed to be under those that are put in authority over us, and Christians are trained the same way. But you see, one of the things, the rebels in the American Revolution were in the pulpits. They rebelled against the crown. Now they knew Romans 13 much better than any of us in here, and they understood they were supposed to be loyal to the crown. But they also understood that God's highest authority, not the higher authority, the highest authority, the crown no longer abided by the highest authority.
Can I mention something about that?
Yes, sir.
When people complain about Romans 13, we're not a representative democracy. We're not beholden to the representatives. We're beholden to the Constitution. We're a
You
constitutional
are absolutely
republic.
correct.
So when the representatives violate the Constitution, they're violating
That
Romans
is exactly
13.
right. And the founders
So,
understood.
and we're supposed to take care of that when they do it. But nobody even knows that now.
Well, because they're not taught it in school. I didn't learn it in school. I didn't learn about this stuff in the school
Well, the other
system.
thing about the pulpit is too, if they even mention the government, the IRS is fine.
Well, I don't give a flip about the
You know what,
pulpit.
and I wish churches would say, you
And
know
I'll
what,
speak
you want
about
your tax cut? Okay, what's the percent? And let's just do this.
Well, some of the churches are actually giving up their 50c3 status, but
That's what needs
but
to
actually 50c3 status doesn't prevent them from saying it anyway.
Right.
But again, it doesn't matter. We are supposed to do what we're supposed to do. As a matter of fact, this book, it's a Citizens Rule book, talks about the Declaration of Independence. It talks about the Constitution, but the Constitution is based on this thing called the Christian history of the Constitution of the United States of America. Look how thick this thing is. Do you think that our Constitution isn't biblically based on the 10 principles of freedom? If you know Dr. Peter Hammond, he wrote this thing called the 10 Principles of Freedom. And he goes through and he talks about some of the things that it's based upon. Things like ownership of property is biblical.
It is.
Absolutely.
Whoa, free enterprise is biblical.
Yeah.
You know, look at Proverbs 31. A woman that did all these things. Job, he had a fortune. Abraham had a fortune. National boundaries is biblical. What happened at the Tower of Babel when they tried to all unite into an international consortium? One of the things that I'd like to see done is if we won't withdraw from the United Nations, then we defund it.
Defund
We
it.
just say,
Amen.
kill it. No money. We educate people. We get people understanding what we're supposed to be about. And the idea of Christianity and not of don't mix religion because the separation is church and state. Well, I wondered about that, so I did a little study on Thomas Jefferson's letter. And I read his letter, and it was a response to the Danbury Baptist Convention. And I read their letter to him. And I started going, wait a minute, there's some problems here. And again, it was that progressive era. It was a compilation of that. It was the education system under a fellow by the name of John Dewey, the father of modern education. the father of original education in the United States was a man named Benjamin Rush.
Yeah.
And he was for educating people about being good citizens and learning morals and ethics so they wouldn't have to go to prison and jail, and that they could learn and read and write and comprehend, and they could draw a closer relationship with the Father through the Son, Jesus
And the
Christ.
primary text for school was the Bible as funded by Congress.
And that's right.
In Congress, one of the first acts they did, once they were organized and they were recognized as the authority, they printed up 10,000 Bibles to be handed out to the public.
There's a congressional record, House Resolution 397, I believe is the number, that lists 80 specific instances of their spiritual heritage of America. And of that, I won't say that there's a Muslim one in there. Now, the idea of separation of church and state, again, it's this progressive move because of the fellow named John Dewey that said there is no God and there is no soul. Well, that's the same thing that the communists want, is there is no conscience. Same thing Adolf Hitler said. He wanted a superior race that had no conscience. And they could do whatever they wanted
And
to
then
do.
there's people and other animals. Right.
So, and the idea that,
That's a
you know,
different thing.
why don't we teach the idea of creation side by side with evolution? You know, I don't have any problem with taking the truth and standing it up against a lie any day of the week. Do you?
And they're both theories.
So why don't we do that?
It's not the law.
Because it's a protected status. A theory has a protected status that you can't do these things. And that's bogus. That's not what truth is all about now, is it? If you're a real scientist, you go after the truth. And if if your hypothesis is flawed and it turns out to be wrong, then you go back to the drawing board. If you think it's proven right, then the first thing you do is look, did I bias it some way? Did I somehow put my own personal bias in there? And then you take it to somebody else and say, test it and see if it works. And if it works, then it's like, then you take it to somebody else, and then you see it, and if it's consistent, then it's no longer theory, it becomes law, a natural law. And that's what the Constitution is based upon, is natural law and the God of nature. But so the idea that you can separate church and state, the whole notion was to prevent a national federalized religion.
And to protect the church from the government.
Well,
And
see,
that's the other
see,
part.
the whole reason for that was when the Puritans came here, they had suffered under King James, quote, the one that, you know, the Bible everybody reads, right? King James was one of the biggest tyrants that England ever saw.
Well, you know,
and because of that, the first thing that they said was, you know what? The government will not be in bed with any particular denomination, but they were Christian.
they were Christian.
They were all Christian, but they were not going to align themselves with, quote, an organized Christian body.
And you can look at the different states' early constitutions. They all said this. They all quoted that. That's why some Protestants landed in certain states, and Methodists in certain states, and Catholics in certain states, and Baptists in certain states. And that was the reason behind it. It wasn't that they were anti-religion, because to them religion was synonymous with Christianity. You can go to a case, a Supreme Court case in 1897 called the United States versus the Holy Trinity. How appropriate. It spells out what they had to say about it. They said, we are a Christian nation. And another gentleman by the name of Joseph Story wrote a 3-volume set on the commentaries of the U.S. Constitution. He wrote it in 1833, and it was the standard for the next 50 years in the United States legal system. And it said in his one of his volumes, I believe it was the 3rd volume, about religion in the United States, about Christianity, he said, you may freely worship any religion that you are. You may freely worship that way. You are guaranteed that right under the Constitution. However, you may not alter the very basic foundational fabric of the United States, which is Christian. Do you see what's happened? Now, when we get to this little game of separation of church and state, well, it slowly tipped this way. Slowly tipped this way. Now it's going to humanism.
Yeah, probably.
By design.
And
By design.
atheism. And it's like, we don't want to follow the Christian religion, the Christian principles. We don't want to have the requirement of truth. We want to do what we want to do. We want to be the most heinous, sinful, deviant people that we can be. So now we teach it in the public school system. And how dare us as parents complain that we're teaching this abominable acts to our children in the name of diversity. Well, there's a phrase that our president likes to use, e pluribus unum, which isn't our motto, but it means one from many. You see, we're back to that unity again, not diversity. Diversity is another name for anarchy.
Yes.
Do you understand that? It's anarchy. Because anything goes, there are no rules. And then it goes back to that, the strongest rule. The strongest rule. That's why the founders put in place things like the First Amendment, freedom of speech, and the Second Amendment, that the right to bear arms, and that the federal government is to teach the militia. By the way, I saw an interesting thing from an organization called Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Organization. A gentleman was addressing them, and he said, if the militia, definition of militia was the National Guard, these guys must have been prophets, because they wrote that in the 1780s. The militia didn't, the National Guard didn't become effective until 1903. Now, how did they know that? Said they were either clairvoyant or they were prophetic. He said, no. The gentleman that wrote the first 10 amendments was named James Mason. No, Mason. Mason. The Constitution was written by Madison, but the Constitution, the father of the Constitution, but the first 10 amendments, they would not sign the Constitution without a guarantee of some of these rights. His name was James Mason. And he said the definition of the militia is the people. So I think the guy knew what he was talking about, since he wrote it that way, don't you? But too many people nowadays in the education department said, we don't have any idea what the original intent of the founders were. I beg to differ with you. I got this nice little book called Original Intent by David Barton. Some of you may recognize that. But you see, what I like about this book isn't just the biographical sketches of the founders, or the cases, and maintaining constitutional integrity, American philosophy of government, selective history, and so on and so forth, but the 1,100 plus citations in the back of documents from those dates. It wasn't based on some law school's determination or some legal decision. It was based on government documents, state and federal, and it's based on the individuals that wrote it and lived it out and fought for it in those dates. So the idea that we can't understand what the original intent, I have a term for you, it's called balderdash. I've got some really stronger adjectives that I would prefer to use, but my Christian faith won't let me use them.
Well, I actually believe they may not be able to understand the original intent.
Yeah, that's right.
That's because they don't want to.
That's why some people argue original meaning, but that takes a little bit of study to say, okay, what did that mean based on
But here's a
language
nice
that-
consolidated little book, and if somebody tells you that they don't know what it means, say, you know what? I've got a real good idea, and I suggest you read this book
The
too.
Federalist Papers just
The
by
Federalist,
themselves
how
do
many
an awfully good
folks
job.
even know of the
Yeah.
Federalist
I would go with
Papers?
that over everything.
How many people
Yeah, he's a
even
hate
know
group.
of the
You gotta
Federalist
watch out.
Papers?
Barton's a hate group, you know.
Well,
You won't get any
Barton
Federalist
thinks that
Papers made-
Sharia law and the Constitution are compatible, and that's my problem with Barton.
But you see, how many people even have read the Federalist Papers where they can cite those arguments? By the way, a lot of those arguments that they had back then are taking place right now in our government. And they said in their argument, this could never happen.
Right.
And it's taking place right now before our very eyes.
I've got a question
Yes,
for
ma'am.
really both of you, and it goes back to the finances in this country. I have an ancestor that was a Baptist preacher during the Revolutionary War, and they actually threw him out of the pulpit because he wanted to stick with England. But the situation we've got here is we've got $2 trillion more given to Obama that is now coming down to the states in grants, and destroying all of our personal rights. Raising that debt ceiling was done by the votes of the 60 Tea Party people put in 2010. They turned, because you're on the finance committee, I called Stacy and I said, could you find out what Tennessee's is? He took 2 weeks and he had to go to, I don't know how many people to find out. But the end figures were $6 billion with a B dollars in the state of Tennessee's rainy day funds. And allegedly, every state except for California and Illinois have mega bucks in rainy day funds. Now, who's holding these? Why can't the citizens of the states use that money to clean up the state and get rid of the rot and tell the federal government to go jump in the way?
Well, officially, right now, the state of Tennessee has about $550 million in the rainy day fund. Now, whether that includes what I'm about to say, there are all these different departments and sub-organizations have balances that they carry forward that they call a reserve fund. Now, I do not think that's included in the rainy day fund. The rainy day fund, if in fact it actually had $6 billion in it, but
it included that.
It may have included that,
It did.
and it probably was in a much better time. We spent a lot of our rainy day fund before I got there. I just got there
3 years ago.
in 2010, because that's when we were going through, after 2008, it started going down.
So who oversees
substantially.
this?
They actually have a state, the finance committee in the House and the finance committee in the Senate, and then the chairs, and then they have like a finance committee, which is those people has a treasurer in there, the comptroller of the state, and a group of other people who I don't even know who they all are. It's probably published somewhere, and they oversee it. And the money is invested. It's not just sitting there. The state, and I don't know all the parameters, but they have certain things they invest in.
And where do they get
Bond.
this money? Is this just
It's
taxpayer
taxes.
dollars
It's
that
taxes.
that they shoot off to this rainy day fund?
Yes.
Isn't there a state mandated amount that goes into that?
Yes, there is, and there actually is an amount. I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be 10% of the budget, and the budget is like it's $31.5 billion. And but what most people, when you start talking about money, and I've ran up against the situation you're talking about. You got to keep in mind that the best way to say it is most of us legislators are prostitutes. We do stuff for the money because, and I'm not saying me personally, but that's what actually happens down there. A big pet peeve of mine, and it probably doesn't affect any of y'all, or y'all probably don't care, but mine is the seatbelt law. I think, I'm a grown adult, and they say I'm have reasonable faculties about me. I ought to be able to determine whether wearing a seatbelt is good or not, and make that decision. But there is something like at one point in time, it was like $5 billion that was tied to the seatbelt law. That we will lose all of the federal highway dollars if we didn't impose
That's
it.
right.
Well,
Each time, it's like you said, you're seeing,
And see, that makes us all prostitutes
Versus addicts.
to do that. And see, I hate that. Same way with where I ride a motorcycle.
Helmet law.
There is a helmet law. Even though I've rode in states that you don't have to wear a helmet, I wear a helmet because I know that's a good thing to do. But I do think I personally am sick and tired of the federal government telling me everything that or the state government tell me everything I have to do to take care of myself.
You're a big baby, you need to
Yeah,
take care of
and
you.
I
Need to
had
protect you.
I had a debate.
From yourself.
Yeah.
I had a debate. I spoke to Tennessee Wesleyan's School of Nursing, and they got all over me because I co-sponsored a bill to remove the motorcycle helmet requirement. And these were nursing students. And this one girl, she just kept on and on and on about and just wouldn't leave it alone. And she was like me, a little overweight. And I said, okay, if you think it's okay for the government to tell you what to do for health reasons, why don't we just pass this? If you're 20 pounds overweight, everybody that is has to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and go to the Y and exercise until they have lost that 20 pounds. She says, oh no, we can't do that.
Why not?
I said, well, you're telling all of us motorcycle riders that for our health and safety reasons, we have to wear a helmet, but we all would agree that if we lose the weight, we'd all be healthier.
Because motorcycle riders are a smaller minority and can
Yeah, that's it.
around. I've read
They
one
can be
too.
pushed around.
Yeah, and that's it, But, it boils down to the money. When it comes to the Tennessee budget, our budget is $31.5 billion, roughly. And of that, just 11 billion of that comes from the state of Tennessee. Now, I say that's a lot of money. But almost, that's just a third, really, when you really think about it. The rest of that money is coming from the federal government.
And probably doing things that don't need to be done.
Probably. And it has strings attached to it.
You were talking about, I think you asked the question about how much is the health care going to cost us, and we can't answer it. I spoke with our corporate, medical insurance advisor last Tuesday, and asked her these questions. And I work for a construction company. I'm in construction, and I'm a foreman, and I work for a company that has approximately 800 employees. So I asked her, I said, how is this going to affect the guys that are working under me? How is this going to affect, every year we do open enrollment, and every year we find out what our premiums are going to be. And she said, normally it's in October, and she said, as of yet, I don't even have the premium change that's going into effect this year.
So
nobody really knows the implications of all of these things yet. When those folks that are sitting there writing the health care premiums, the policy premiums and stuff, they haven't gotten it out to the field yet. We don't know what those answers are going to be. It's a very complicated process. I've listened to CEOs of healthcare companies give presentations, and it's like these are all sorts of factors, wellness, health maintenance, all sorts of other factors that are beginning in. Preventive medicine is becoming more involved in it and more critical to it. But then you also have medical malpractice, and you have the aging, the population of the United States in general is aging. Then you have that Medicare, and you have the shell game of Medicare versus Medicaid versus all the other stuff. Rob Peter to pay Paul and say, look what a wonderful job I did about lowering your health care costs. So there is so much junk out there that until we see it in writing, we really won't know. It's like Nancy Pelosi said, pass the bill and then you can find out what's in it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't this all the more reason why our governor should just nullify it right here, right now?
You've got to keep in mind, our governor wants to be president.
I know, he's got national
I mean, and he's not going to alienate the federal government. He's not going to start any fights with the federal
Well,
government.
we need to oust him.
We definitely.
But we can't oust him because he's not done anything to the scale that he can be considered to that level of being
Allowing
ousted.
Viper on our roads?
Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
TSA is all over the
We
place.
understand that, but again, it goes right back to that issue that it's your interpretation of what Viper is versus his interpretation and his Attorney General's interpretation and everybody else that we tied up in the court system.
Well, you know, I was at the meeting we had on the 25th, and they talked about what they did in Alabama, about making it illegal for anything that has to do with, to be funding anything that has to do with Agenda 21.
That's right.
Well, we listened to Mark Donaldson, who said, and I'm going to quote here, that all of this stuff he's doing does not have anything to do with Agenda 21. So, if we pass that law in Tennessee, we've got the guy that's the head of the department saying, well, this doesn't have anything to do with Agenda 21. So who's going to prove, who's going to prove that it does?
Their own websites prove it, because they hired Wallace Robertson Todd as their partner to push smart growth in these 5 counties. Wallace Robertson Todd is directly tied to the American Planning Association, and their big shot guy, David Rouse,
But how long is it going to tie it up in the court system?
Yeah, but the point I'm trying to make is, you know that, and I know that, but there's probably several million people in Tennessee that don't know.
And don't care.
And don't care. And so they're going to say, when you've got the head of somebody like Mark Donaldson, oh, this doesn't have anything to do with that.
And they're going to believe
So
it.
how do you enforce that, is what I'm getting at.
Let's see, part of their training as a quote, planner, is their doctrine that I've already read says that they have to be willing to push this federal law because they have a whole list of laws that they're
Correct.
Right.
okay? And if they have to go to jail for breaking current law to get this in place, that's what they're willing to do. So maybe let them sit in jail for a while and see how well they like it.
The thing is, though, the point I was trying to make is, it's going to be, it's not, it may be to you and to I, it's cut and dry what Agenda 21 is and what it's not. But to the most of the legislature, it's not. It's not cut and dried at all. And so until those folks who are casting these votes, you know, we can pass, say we pass the same thing that Alabama passed. All these people are going to do is say, this don't have anything to do with Agenda 21. This is just good planning.
That's right. It's good.
It's good planning. That's what they're going to say.
Yeah,
That's right.
There it is, Agenda 21.
Ideal communist
from the
city.
50s.
But you see what I'm saying? It's not, it's cut and dried.
That's the
It's, you know, it's the same, it's the seatbelt kind of argument. These folks, we're helping you. We're doing this for your benefit.
I don't want your help.
Oh, I don't either. But, you know,
Back to leave us alone.
yeah, but that's what I say. Leave us alone.
See, that's part of this process, is educating people about these sorts of things. That's why I raise as many questions as I put out information about, because I totally am against Agenda 21, because I understand it. And I also understand the senator's role in passing Agenda 21, just as he understands his role at the state level, is that if they can pass anything, it's like the Lost Treaty. Let me read you something out of this Constitution right here that talks about the Lost Treaty. This is Article 1, Section 8, under duties and responsibilities of the Congress. To define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas and the offenses against the law of nations. That's what our Constitution says about the law of the sea. We are to determine it, and we are to deal with those people. Under the Lost Treaty, we won't have this constitutional authority anymore. We will give it away if the senators go along with it. And you don't think our senators are good and ready to give it away, just like anything else? The other part about this is, you need to understand, even if it's not a formal treaty, a lot of things come about informal treaties through economic treaties, like NAFTA. I'm still waiting on all those high-tech jobs to show up that NAFTA promised us, aren't you?
Giant sucking.
Talk to the Indians in Mexico, in southern Mexico, that are still fighting the Civil War, because when all this American corn came down there, they lost their livelihood. And they're fighting the Mexican government for the last 30
See,
years.
and that's another thing that I'm wholeheartedly for, and that's mandating that a requirement is put on anything that has a genetically modified component in it. It needs to be listed there. Because I'm tired of people that are trying to make a living selling organic things, like selling raw milk, getting picked up by some federal bureaucrat carrying a gun with a letter that says you violated state law. Where is the, what's that thing called you're supposed to have when you go to arrest somebody? Called a warrant?
Yeah.
They're not even doing that anymore. So I'm not for any of this kind of garbage. I'd like to see it done away with. And you know, when you come up and become a co-sponsor on a bill, that's telling all his constituents back home, I'm for you, I love you, look, I'm on your side. I co-sponsored this bill. Well, my attitude is, if you think it's such a needed legislation, why didn't you be the forerunner and sponsor it and put your name out there on front of it?
Cowards.
Well, it's just another one of those patronizing ways of dealing with you, and then 6 months before your 6 years of term is up, then you come back and say, I'm a wonderful candidate. Look, I co-sponsored all these bills just for you. And they already know that they've talked with the rest of the people in the Senate that this thing ain't got a snowball's chance of ever getting passed, right?
Right.
You know the game.
Hey, have you had an opportunity to look at the sections of the state constitution that deal with the counties, how the counties can interact with each other and how municipalities can interact with each other, especially when it comes to money?
No.
There's sections in there that are interesting as it relates to Agenda 21.
And regional
Yeah.
groupings.
Right, regional groupings. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's natural. I was like, well, when I heard about Agenda 21 and 5 or 9, whatever they are, counties getting together, I was like, doesn't the state have some authority there?
Yes, they do.
And they do, because of course they would assume some authority. So I don't know, if you could, when you get a chance, look at the Constitution specifically with an eye toward the counties or municipalities doing business together. Because there's some pretty strong language in there about 3/4 of votes of all the municipalities that are going to be tied together.
Yeah, instead of being bamboozled into and hot.
And I know the governor wouldn't do anything, but it's pretty important. There's some language like that in the state constitution.
But one of the points I want to make about all that I said about all this stuff, what you need to do if you want to have an actual serious effect on legislation is to email these folks and try to educate them and call them and try to educate them. Because most people...
I'm pretty sure it's already illegal in Tennessee. You look at the Constitution.
I'm not necessarily just talking about that one issue, but all these things, about the Agenda 21 stuff. Right. They understand, they know a little, but it's like they know enough to be dangerous. They don't know. And they need people to inform them. Say, this is going on. And
I think a good number of them are just willingly ignorant.
Well, I think we're tinfoil hats,
I don't even think necessarily they're willingly ignorant. They are happy to pursue power in the federal dollars. I think it's intentional.
And that's to me one of the things that needs to be done is cut off all grant money, because the question comes, if you get Homeland Security money after 9/11, we threw billions and trillions of dollars into. So now we have new police officers, new firemen, new EMTs and stuff that are good for 3 years under the federal dollars. Well, what happens when the federal dollars dry up in 3 months, in 3 years from now, and all of a sudden then you're stuck with paying the tab on it? It's just like all this federal money going thrown to teacher salaries and stuff like that. And it's not your dollars down here at the state, it's federal money that's paying for it. And it's like, at the end of 3 years, well, how do you pay for the teachers?
Well, I can say, when I was on city council...
Well, you just don't like kids. That's what's wrong.
That actually became a big issue when I was on city council about these. We would have people like in the police department that would write grant requests to hire police officers, to get money to fund them, and firemen. And what actually happened after they did that, and this was Mayor Hassan when he was mayor, he said, and told all the departments, you do not write any request for any grants from the federal government that they have to do, that are tied to employees, unless he approves it, because what happened is just what you were just talking about. You have 2 or 3, you hire 10 police officers, and the federal government pays for them for 2 years or 3 years, and then you've got them. And the way the employment system was set up in the city of Knoxville, you can't terminate them. I mean, not because the money ran out, you've got to come up with increased funding. So he did curtail them, and I'm not a big supporter of Bill Haslam. We had a lot of problems, but he did come along.
We still have a lot of problems.
Yeah. Well, I mean, personally problems with him. But, you know, he actually did say, don't do that, because it was creating problems with lots of these grants that we were receiving from the federal government. Yes.
Commissioner Gibbons of the Department of Homeland Security met and is meeting with AMAC, the American Muslim Advisory Council. Why is that, and why can we, the American Christian Advisory Council, meet with him too?
I don't know anything about him meeting with the Muslims, and I don't see why you couldn't.
Okay, but there is supposed to be a separation of church and state, supposedly. Right? But they're
Actually,
with the
no,
Muslim
there's not.
Advisory Council.
There is not.
I know.
There is not a
I know.
separation of churches. Yeah.
That's right.
You know, now, there has been one that's came out of nowhere, and they say it's there, but you can't, and I'm sure this constitutional scholar here can't tell you where it is, because it's not there.
Because Mr. Gibbons sent his second in command over here to Knoxville to meet with the Muslim American Homeland Security Congress, mosque, over there.
Yeah.
Well,
Yes, sir.
I want to say this, I'm not supposed to be here tonight. This is the night of our Tennessee Firearms Association meeting here in Knoxville, and I'm supposed to be down there. But the problem we have is that we can't get rid of the politicians that are in office now. For instance, Haslam, when he was running for governor, the Tea Party had a big convention down in Gatlinburg.
Right.
Put them on stage and asked each candidate how much money they had in their campaign fund. At that time, Haslam had $12 million. Ron Ramsey, 12 and a half, I think it was. Ron Ramsey had $6 million, half of that. The next one, I forget who it was now.
Brandon Dodds.
Huh?
Brandon Dodds ran.
Probably.
I don't remember who it was, but he had I think it was $3 million, half of what Ramsey had. And then we got down to Samuel Duck. And when they asked him, he probably said, I've got $500 my daddy gave me. Well, he didn't stand a chance anywhere. Haslam bought the election, the nomination.
That's right.
Bob Corker had 2 Republican primary candidates against him who at least sounded good. Corker, if I remember right, he spent either $5 or $6 million on his primary run. He still had either $5 or $6 million left for the general election. The other 2 candidates, who were probably considered the main candidates, only spent, what I read in the paper, was $17,000 apiece is all they had to run on. You cannot run a campaign and expect to win when you're running against somebody who's spending millions and you're spending a few $1,000s. Now, here's the thing of it. We have been going too long without the best man winning the elections.
You're right.
That's right.
Corker would not debate either one of these people.
He never will.
Because he didn't have to. He could buy it. He could buy the TV time, the radio time, and these people had to go grassroots. If we don't do something, this man here, I came here, I wanted to hear him. Because anybody but Obama, well, for me it's that and anybody but Corker. I will not vote for Corker. I wanted to hear what he had to say. He'll get my vote on election day. He will get my vote. But if he doesn't have the finances to get out there and campaign and amount a campaign like Corker will totally ignore you.
We have 50 days left before early voting starts to the Senate race.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need $1 to win the election. I need good people to go out and vote. That's what wins election. I don't care what the media does. I understand it takes money to buy elections,
Well,
and
you
that's
have to buy
basically
the
what we're
advertising.
doing. But I'm not about buying an election. I'm doing what's right, and I would like everybody else to do what's right and vote for who they believe is the right candidate, and we will flip this country and turn it back. But that's what it's going to take. Get on the phone and call your friends and call your relatives and say, this guy is for real. And you can look at some of my, you can go to look at those DVDs there. You can go on you can go on the internet and pull up Kermit Steck. You can see a little bit about my military record in there. You can see a little bit about whenever I ran for 1st Congressional District 2 years ago. But it boils down to duty is ours and the results are up to God. When Christians will do what's right and just disavow political parties and do what's right, isn't that what 2 Chronicles 7:14 says?
Yeah.
Well, let's enumerate on some of the wicked ways that we've decided to do. Let's list some of those things in our own minds. It's like, what are we doing that's wicked? We putting man's ways ahead of God's ways. We putting homosexuality ahead of families. We're putting all sorts of things that are godless in front of God's ways. And one of the things that I didn't realize until a few years ago is, and this mindset was trained into me too, is how much does it cost? Up until, say, 60 or 70 years ago, that wasn't the main question that people asked. It said, is it right or not?
Mm-hmm.
But we've been trained because we've gone from a moral-based society to an economic-based society.
Before that, it was how does it secure my freedom or not?
Yeah.
And that's one of those things that we have to ask again.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that I'd like to see done, and that's on a video in there, is you brought up the idea of firearms, is I'd like to see a national reciprocal handgun carry permit.
Yes.
Yes.
If you got it in one state, I'd like to see firearms training mandated in the school system to teach our young men and women how to properly handle firearms.
Wasn't that why the NRA was established? Because civilians, when they were called to go to war, couldn't hit the broadside of a bullet, or a barn with a bullet, you know. And so this is when we would need to start training our guys, and they formed the National Rifles Association to help train.
But that's what Minutemen did too.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I go back to what James Mason said about the idea of who's the militia. It's everybody here. You know, self-defense. It's not only self-defense, but it's to protect yourself against tyrannical governments, because that's one of the things tyrannical governments does is disarm the public, because they can. Then what are they going to do?
Well, what Marxists do is start exterminating the population. That's a Marxist.
And they also starve them too.
Yeah, well, but extermination by whatever means is very smart. I mean, look at nationalized healthcare. There's a good avenue right there.
Okay, I did a study, the last 110 years, how many people died prematurely at the hands of genocide. And the only people that commit genocide are governments.
Yep.
Anyone want to take a guess what that number was the last 110 years?
120
200 million.
210 million.
210?
210 million people. Just in the last 110 years, died prematurely at the hands of government genocide.
Part of, this kind of goes back to you mentioned that most of the legislators don't know whether things are tied to Agenda 21 or not, but at its fundamental level, this sort of something I'm feeling called to, but I don't quite know what to do about it. But truth is simple. And one of the core truths is, I'm not talking about the U.S., anywhere in the world, the biggest enemy of the people is their government. That's right. Because it is the only entity that can do anything it wants to and can turn on you. You know, you may think it's good now until it's, you know, your ox being gored, but government is the thing to be feared. And when you take that up a notch, this is where I can't believe, because it doesn't take much research to tie you know, all these regional planning things to Agenda 21, to the UN, and when they have had the gall to basically, you know, embrace the Malthusian economic of scarcity and all, but the goal in their own books is the elimination of 80 to 85% of the population of the world.
That's right.
That doesn't take a lot of research to get there. So how do our leaders act so blind?
They're complicit.
I don't get it.
Well, one of the things, and from my limited experience in the state legislature, one of the things is they will tell you right off the bat when you start talking about Agenda 21, it's never been ratified by the Senate, so it's not being implemented. Also, that's one of the things you hear a lot down there. You know, that it hasn't been ratified, it's not law, so they're not doing it. And there are people, and I mean, they're saying it, and I don't think they're lying as they're saying it. I think they actually believe that.
They do.
You know, I mean, now how they got to that point, I don't know. You know, now maybe they wouldn't, I'm sure they wouldn't take the time to read one of these books that explains it because they don't care, because they've got somebody that will tell them. They've got the government telling them, well, this is what we need to do. And I'm not saying these folks that are ignorant, for lack of a better term, are bad people. They're just uninformed.
Useful idiots.
Yeah, they're just uninformed of, you know, or don't want to see it. Yeah.
Well, you know, it's exactly right. There's a phrase called soft policy implementation. Are you familiar with it?
Yes.
Yes.
And that's what they do. They said you're just taking, the bureaucrats get hold of it. You said to yourself, you pass legislation, this is the intent behind it, but they get hold of it, and all of a sudden, instead of going this
Pass
way,
it over to the
it goes
right
way over this way.
Yeah.
So they're implementing it through bureaucracy, and it's happening everywhere. You know, we talk about the firearms. The Constitution is my handgun carry permit.
That's what I said.
That is exactly right. I concur wholeheartedly. But at the same token, I understand the reality of the situation is that if I'm out here on the street and something happens, and if I use my firearm, one of the first things they're going to ask me about, are you trained? Well, I was trained for 11 years in the United States military. You know, I carried it, and I don't feel that I was improperly trained, but that's not going to qualify me to be legitimate at it. And it's much more of a legal thing nowadays, so that I don't get sued as much as anything else. But it's getting to the point, it's becoming less and less, and we have to turn this whole thing around. I'd like to see everybody in the United States carrying a handgun and have a rifle in their trunk. It's just the way I am. You know, I grew up around this stuff all my life. It's like, we didn't have people who shot each other.
You know, I'm a constitutional theory person. I don't think we need permits.
Right.
I mean, you know, I think I have the right to carry a gun to protect myself at any time. I don't need the government to say, yes, you can do that.
So, but why are we, as a people in the state of Tennessee, paying a tax to exercise something that God gave us?
That's right. You're right. But, and I've mentioned that in the legislature several times, and that does, you know, we've got to train people. We can't put untrained people out here without guns, with guns. So,
One or two accidents with a gun, they'll remember those lessons really well.
Wasn't it good that those New York City cops were trained real well when they shot that guy?
Oh, yeah.
All the civilian casualties were shot by the police.
Isn't that what they're afraid we will do if we have to draw our gun in public? Well, you want innocent bystander.
You know, I just had to renew my handgun carry permit. If I wanted to be legal in the state of Tennessee to carry a gun, or out of the state where they recognize it. But I told them, I said, this is really ironic that I have to come in here and give you people $50 for a permit to exercise a God-given right that's guaranteed by the Bill of Rights in this country. I said, this is really ironic that you can take my $50, so I can exercise a right. When you have to start having a permit, the right is no longer a right. You know, and I had somebody the other day posted on a thing about, well, what about a driver's license? I said, you show me in the Constitution where you're guaranteed the right to drive. You're not.
Well, you actually are.
Actually, you are.
Right to travel by the means of the day.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean everybody's
See,
got the right
that's
to
the whole
drive.
thing, it's a
You've
different,
got the right to
it's
travel.
a different law.
It's not prohibited, it's not prohibited to us by grant to the federal government.
Once and
It's
it's good
ours.
for
It
your
is
life.
Conveyance today.
They don't even send you from the gun permit place a reminder. And if
Oh,
it
they did, no.
expires and you
Did they?
forget,
Yeah, I
you
got one.
gotta go through the whole schmear
Yeah.
again.
Oh, and the time before this, when I renewed, it took 6 months and 22 days and 2 calls to my state representative to get my permit issued. Now, that's the
Same
kind
with
of
you.
workings that we had in the state. This time, it took 2 weeks. I went to the driver's license place, did it, and it took me 2 weeks and I had it. But I shouldn't even have to do that.
No, I agree.
But the guns, the so-called guns in parking lot, the safe commute bill that was up this year, I was told that it was the Tennessee Firearms Association's fault because that didn't get passed when the Republican leadership in the state of Tennessee had no intention of passing it. They would not vote it out to go to the floor. The Democrats all voted for it so they could make the Republicans look bad because they didn't have the votes to put it on the floor.
What happened with that?
And the only thing that they're mad at the TFA about is the TFA is holding these politicians who promised us that they would support these Second Amendment issues and didn't. Ron Ramsey, Beth Harwell, who you know says she's pro-rights. Some of these others, we're holding them accountable, and they don't like it. So they're putting the blame, trying to put the blame back on the TFA, and it's not going to work.
Well, I co-sponsored the bill Eddie Bass carried. He was a Democrat. They wanted the Democrat to carry it in the House. I think it was a Republican carried it in the Senate. But anyway, I co-sponsored that bill. And the way this all went down, probably 2 weeks before we were out of session, we had a caucus meeting. And that's where all the Republicans, and I won't say all of us, but it was a Republican meeting. I don't think they all were there. They're never all there. But it was, I guess, maybe 60 of us in this room. And they gave us all a piece of paper, and you write yes, that meant we bring it up, and it could bring it to the floor, or no, it would not go to the floor. And it got 16 votes to bring it to the floor.
Yeah. That's the good support they promised us when they begged for our support to get them elected.
Yeah.
I worked for Ron Ramsey to try to get him elected governor. I'll guarantee you I wouldn't work for him for a dog catcher today.
Me too, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep,
And I'll tell him that to his face.
me too.
They always
Never
say it's
would.
not a good time, not a good time.
But he's getting a lot of
It is a good
business in
time.
his auction company from Haslam, so that's why he's going along with all
Well,
this.
I believe it wasn't a good time because there was too much political donations made to not bring it up.
FedEx was the only company that I heard named
I heard Volkswagen too.
that made a big stink about it, was FedEx. And actually, it was a FedEx employee that convinced me it was a good idea. And what happened, because I really am a property rights person, if I don't want you on my property, if you come to my house and you got a gun, and now I would let you, but if I didn't want you to come into my house with a gun, that's my right to tell you you can't.
I agree.
But-
And the employer had the right to say you cannot bring it into the plant.
I agree.
But that car is my personal property. If I lock it in my car, it's in my personal property. It has to be there to work for them.
The reason what convinced me was I talked to a young lady in Memphis who worked for FedEx. She said that she was coming home from work and was about to be, 2 guys came up to her car and were going to hijack her, carjack her. And she was armed and prevented that. And she said to me, it's not a property rights issue, it is a personal safety issue. And she thoroughly convinced me of that.
There's a lot of people who work at night. I mean,
Yeah, and that's where it's going to happen. I don't worry about while you're in this building,
Right.
But it's
something
walking
happening
to
to you,
your
it's
car.
getting to and from here
That's right.
that you're gonna have a problem.
That's right.
In most cases. And she convinced me that this is not about property rights, this is about my personal safety.
It's insurance companies.
It's insurance companies, it's lots of reasons.
That's the seatbelt.
I drove a truck for a number of years, and if I had to either make a delivery or a pickup in Memphis, Tennessee, if it was night when I got there, I could go to the business and back in and be there ready to unload in the morning or pick up. I wouldn't do it. I went over to Arkansas and stayed in a truck stop, which was a lot better than staying in Memphis, because I wouldn't go in there after dark.
Yeah.
That's right.
And I wouldn't to this day. If I had to go over through Memphis, I'm not going through there unarmed,
Right.
because I have seen the way it is.
Memphis is a different world.
It
For
is.
people that haven't been out there and visited, it is not like the rest of Tennessee. You know, I mean, we got some bad spots in Knoxville that you shouldn't go, but Memphis is just,
That's right.
in general, is a bad place to be.
Well, down in McMinn County, my
Right.
husband works for Plastic Industries in Athens. And 3 years ago, last February, there was a burglary. Well, what is it, a robbery when somebody comes in and you're there? That's a robbery. Okay. The owner of the company was watching the plant that they were gonna close, and it had 3-room apartment in it, so he was staying in there. He caught the guy breaking in, trying to get tools to steal for drugs, whatever. And he had a sheriff on the phone, gun in the other hand, holding the guy. A guy that was a former employee came up behind him and shot him in the head, okay? Now, the boys that took over after their daddy was murdered, they are big-time gun enthusiasts. In fact, they own night rifles. That's what the company makes, night rifles, muzzle loaders, okay? The thing that they were told by insurance was that it was going to cost them a left lung if they allowed their employees to have firearms on the property, anywhere on their property, whether their cars were their own personal property, if it was parked on the business property, it was their insurance that was affected if anything happened. Okay, so here's what the boys did. Now, this may not sound righteous to all of you, but the boys aren't stupid either. They make guns in there, so what they decided was the select number of salaried employees and the 2 boys would always be armed. But for the factory workers, I mean, these people, they'd screw a pig in there while they're supposed to be working. That's how dumb some of them are. You can't let them, I'm serious, that we've caught them. So you can't let them have a firearm. They got knives and all kinds of other stuff that they keep catching them with, and you gotta get rid of them because it will kill the business. The insurance companies will kill the business if there's a lawsuit, see?
Well, part of me says the whole law should have just been left alone. It should have been a don't ask, don't tell kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Because,
Personal.
you know, I've got friends that work at Oak Ridge at Y12. They don't search their cars when they go in there. You know what I'm saying? If you've got a gun in your car, you know, it's your business. You know, I actually think it's one of those things that
That should use legislation that way. Don't
well,
ask,
actually,
don't tell.
the legislation that was that was proposed, it relieved the responsibility from the property owner for any liability. Now, whether their insurance company would say that too, I don't know. See, because no matter what you legislate, there's some way you can still sue.
This lady had a question.
Yes.
Steve, back to the voting thing. I'm really concerned about the up and coming vote. First of all, the electronic voting machine, that's a big issue to me. But anyway, we went to Chattanooga to a conference down there about 3 weeks ago or so. Senator May Beaver spoke. She said that 10,000 felons voted in the last election, which is totally illegal, and that most of them were from Memphis. So what does that tell you?
I'm not surprised.
Okay, then I asked her, what is Nashville doing, everybody, about the illegals voting? She said, absolutely nothing. This is an outrage. This stuff has got to stop.
Well, the photo ID to vote was intended to hit the illegals, and really, actually, they say has. They say there's not a lot of people being caught, but the reason they're not being caught, they're not going to vote because they don't have the proper identification. But that's being challenged. The Democrats have sued to overturn the photo ID bill. They sued in federal court, and then they dropped it, and now they're suing in state court.
But you need a photo ID to get into their convention.
That's right.
TSA.
To get on the bus for the random mob. Bus them over there too, yeah.
Cash and check at the bank if it's
Most
over.
everything that we've talked about tonight and heard about has been the affront on our personal freedoms that are guaranteed by the Constitution.
Right.
And all you hear in an election is the economy and jobs, the economy and jobs. I'm old enough to remember back in the early 60s when I got out of high school, I could go get a job,
Anyway.
put an application in today, and tomorrow they called me and go to work. And I'm not talking about, a 75-cent an hour job. I'm talking about at GM or Ford's or, somebody like that paid decent money, well, supposedly decent money. And if I didn't like the job, I could quit today, go put an application in tomorrow and be working the day after, or maybe that same day. We have more freedoms, more personal freedoms then. But I got in a car at a car auction one day with an old man to ride out and get one that we bought. And I said something about we're losing our freedoms. And he told me, he said, son, what year were you born? And I told him 1945. He says, you don't even know what freedom is. We've been losing our freedoms in this country since way, way back.
Oh, yeah.
And I finally figured it out. It started in 1860 when the Civil War started in the North War, and there went our state rights and our personal freedoms. And it continued on down.
That is one of the reasons I want so much to see the 17th Amendment repealed.
Right.
Because I understand that concept. It is to the states because they are much more responsive to the citizenry. And I know that. And there won't be you don't think that there will be a drastic change in the funding if the states who have to pay for it anyway? Their senators go to Washington, D.C., and they start proposing things. Don't you think the state's going to say, whoa, boy, what are you doing?
Right.
And if you don't straighten out, you'll lose your job, and we'll put somebody else in there that understands the concept.
You would also have more voter participation.
I believe you would too.
And a lot less lobbying.
And a lot less lobbying. So you brought up a great point.
My Bill of Rights is not complicated. I have a right to.
State education systems, instead of one, that's 50 they have to go after instead of just one. The same thing with energy, the same thing with any kind of federalized system like that. There's 50 of them instead of one.
Looking at sort of all these things, I'm just very curious because I think the second plank of the Communist Manifesto is progressive income tax. What's your state stance on the fair tax?
Fair tax, they're not constitutional. Plain and simple.
What's not constitutional?
Any kind of sales tax. If you look at it, it says it basically boils down to tariffs and duties and import taxes. It's up to the states to decide how they want to implement their taxes. But as far as one is a value-added tax and one is a progressive sales tax. Which one do you want? Or do we go back to, we talk about employment, one of the ways that we can implement employment a lot quicker is if we quit giving favored status to nations that are.
They're our enemies.
They are our enemies. Let me say this about that while we're on that subject. Do you know what, that in the 40s, it was a requirement, in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, and the 80s, anything in the military base had to be made in the United States.
Amen.
It needs to go back to that.
Yes, it does.
Because our enemies, our economic enemies, our political enemies, our philosophical enemies, our theological enemies, they're the ones that are. Go look at a GI's combat boots today. It says made in China. Look at his uniform. Look at this stuff, folks. This is nuts. If we had to go to war against somebody, we don't have an economic base that it's established, a manufacturing base, to even put it into play right now.
Right.
And it's worse than that. It's not just the boots. It's these
It's
very
everything.
integral parts that are in our
It's
fighting planes.
everything.
It's
And they're finding out
electronic
failing.
subcomponents, and there's huge danger there.
It's
That's-
all,
that's-
it's
and that's
everything.
huge.
So that's one of the things. So
It's
we go back to quit giving
Yeah, and
favored nation status to these people that are our enemies, that are philosophical enemies of ours. They're not constitutional. They are everything social, communism, fascism, dictatorial, whatever you want to call them. They are everything that opposes us, and yet they're our economic base. So we have to. So to me, the idea of a sales tax, a fair tax, or something like that is a moot point. If we go constitutional route and we put in duties and tariffs, then it's going to suck for a while. But you know what? The entrepreneurial spirit of Americans is like, you know what? I think I can make some money at
When you
this.
stop that long, everybody in this room will work.
So it won't take long.
Well, I would beg to differ that it's not a moot point. Most of our founding fathers said the federal government has no right to the produce of any man's income. And essentially, the whole tax scenario is a fabrication.
The 16th Amendment, we're talking about income tax versus a sales tax.
Right, I mean.
There is no income tax on a man's wages. Show me the law that says we have a law.
Well, I understand that, but if that 16th Amendment was repealed and we instituted something like it, takes the power away from the federal government, social engineer, manipulate, all that. There's a huge difference between provide and promote. But, I mean, instantly, if we recognize simple truth, the truth is businesses do not pay taxes. They collect a lot of them. They don't pay them. That business is either going to be able to make whatever it considers a margin of profit that says we stay in business, or they're going out of business. The people that are hurt the most are the poorest among us. It's when our gas goes up, you know, all this crap about taxing businesses is just a lie. It's the same thing as cost of, you know, materials, overhead, labor. It all goes into the pricing model, and all we're doing is living a lie. If we went to a national sales tax, I don't care what you call it, but eliminated that ability to divide, because that's all it is, turns us into criminals. Our income tax creates criminals, and it's useless, non-productive, and kills the poorest of us the worst.
We had a wonderful speaker. His name was David Eldridge.
Stephen Eldridge.
Stephen Eldridge, and he's a tax attorney or an CPA attorney, and he showed us exactly what would happen with the fair tax. We would end up paying for everything we purchased 40% in tax.
It would be no different. That's
We're probably paying about that.
That's the
I
difference.
get it.
No. You're paying 9 1/4 or 8.75. You are not paying
that's
40
not true.
cents
That is
on
totally
a dollar.
not true. There are so many built-in and hidden costs. It's not. And I can defend that, and I'll defend it with Steve Eldridge.
Well,
the reality,
get with him then.
I'd be happy to do so, but I guarantee you, I can prove
Tea
that.
Party, Steve, on Thursday.
Yeah, Roane County Tea Party on Thursday. Go there on Thursday.
I'll have to catch you somewhere else. I'm occupied, but
Well,
that's not
I'll
that's the
send
myth.
you his email.
That is the
And you
myth
get
that
with
is,
him.
that is thrown in about it, but there's about 23% built-in costs, either, you know, regulatory cost, taxes at 23 different levels on a loaf of bread, those all come out. And if you want to talk difference between marginal and quote-unquote quoted, it's the same argument with income taxes, you know.
Well, Jerome.
But I'll be happy to take him on, I'd love
Jerome, the thing is, everybody that's pushing this, guess what they want in order to get rid of the 16th Amendment? They want a constitutional convention to get rid of the 16th Amendment so they can institute the fair tax. Can you imagine the delegates the states today would send for a con-con? My God in heaven, they've got the new state's constitution written that is written in an obverse style so that it reads one way, but it means countless other things, and it totally destroys any God-given freedoms. That's what the enemy wants, so you gotta be real careful what you back here. And as far as NAFTA, who started all of this garbage, NAFTA was written by Richard Allen, a fellow at Heritage Foundation, and Heritage Foundation sold free trade to the entire right. Why does Rush Limbaugh push it? Why does, what's that guy's name that substitutes for him that's from New Hampshire and he's got an accent?
Mark Stein.
Mark Stein pushes it. The black guy that ran for president
Kane
pushes it. They all push it. And every single one of them wants a con-con too. Isn't that kind of scary? When you look underneath, just like these guys up here that we elected and they turned on us and they voted the wrong way on countless things. I mean, Alan West called his Tea Party people in Florida on Laura Ingraham's show schizos because they were unhappy that he voted to raise the debt ceiling. How do you like that? Isn't that nice what we put up there? That makes me sick. That's why we got to keep guys like this in there.
Right.
Oh, I just get so angry with them.
But see, Alan West was a military man.
Yeah.
He was retired. Let me tell you, I don't know how many of you guys are military or not, but my training was United States Constitution to oath of defendant. But I didn't understand the Constitution because I wasn't trained in the Constitution.
They also taught what an illegal order is when I was in.
Yes.
That's right. They still teach illegal orders and things along that line. When I ran up and down the
Lawful
barracks,
orders versus unlawful. That's right. Unlawful, that's the word.
But those things about constitutionality, and I wasn't trained in that stuff. So Alan West is a conservative that got up there. He's still a conservative, but he's not constitutional minded. The question's not asked, is it right, is it moral, is it ethical, is it biblical, is it constitutional? The moral and the ethical may be crossing his mind, but is it constitutional? Never crosses his mind. Because he doesn't look at that thing from that frame of reference.
Well, that's how they sold Social Security and all these other
Well,
programs.
that's exactly
It's moral.
it. What is the government's role? To protect the rights of the people.
Right.
Is there anything else?
And so
To
is our
secure our
governor's.
freedom, that's it.
Is there anything else?
Secure our freedom. Otherwise we're
So
falling
is our
out.
governor.
That's it, period. The rest of it is up to us.
Right.
And the church, God forbid the church to pull up and take care of its role, again, its proper role, to help and take care of one another.
We wouldn't have that health
We wouldn't have all sorts of things that the government has taken over the role of the church because we bought this lie of separation of church and state.
By design.
by design, but the government is now the new religion.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah, that's it.
That's what INU says.
It's now the new religion.
Government.
The federal government is now where you need to
INU
worship.
said.
And if you don't worship the federal government, and you're a kook or loon or
You're
Nazi,
extremist.
whatever they want to call it.
Potential terrorists.
You get on the list.
Potential terrorist threat.
Right-wing extremists.
Yes.
All of the above. I'm guilty of all of the above. I'm guilty of a right to life, of
You need
pro-marriage.
to be
I'm guilty
hospitalized.
of all of these things. The constitutional,
Something's wrong.
the idea that the big government is in charge and that the small government is, you're a kook. Well, guess what? I'm a kook. I'm not a weirdo. I'm all of the above. And I don't care anymore that people know that. But that's what it's going to take, is a whole bunch of people, and I'll close with this. If people don't like me, that I don't agree with their ideals, the communists, the socialists, the homosexual agenda, because there's a 5-minute, if you don't get that video back there for any other reason, read what I have to say about, or listen to what I have to say about homosexuality in there. Because the biblical argument we all know, but I approach it from a legal argument, from a psychological argument, and from a biological argument. It's not an attack on them, it's just stating the truth. And the question that I leave you with is, somebody's gonna try to take me out, or they will take me out. The question is, who's gonna take my place? That was one of the things they taught us in the military. My job as a commander is to train my NCOs and my privates, my junior officers, to be in charge when I'm taken out and seize that initiative. Because I've become a casualty, you guys need to know how to carry on. And that's what I'm saying to you all. If somebody takes me out, you all got to pick up the ball and run with it. Because somebody's going to try, and somebody's going to try to threaten me, or try to take me out, or arrest me on some trumped up charge that the government doesn't have to give me a search warrant, arrest warrant, tell you where I am anymore, or anything along that line, and hold me indefinitely, just like I'm a terrorist, but I'm a U.S. citizen. So that's what I close with.
Amen.
Well, I think we've had quite a night. I want to thank both of you for coming. This was really, really informative. Thank you all for all your questions. And if you want to see what everybody said, you can go to Rocky Top Freedom. How long will it be?
I'll have it up by tomorrow. We have a YouTube channel. You can see the Stephen Eldridge video there, by the way, if you want to check that out. It's just YouTube. It's youtube.com/Rocky Top Freedom. That's our channel there.
And you can see
also,
every word in high definition.
Yep, I'll try to get it up there by tomorrow night at the latest. So.
Also, too, you can also.
Oh yeah, I love you. Well, I'm astounded at your. I'm astounded at the degree because I'm killing myself trying to make a living, and there's so many things I want to do. But your emails are inspiring. Sometimes I don't agree, but I love the effort and the passion and the commitment that you are putting forth.
Okay, so we can take that passion because we have to pay for the room, so we need donations. There's a hat up there. Also, these men need donations because they traveled long and far to get here, and they're trying to get reelected, and of course we all know that costs money. So give as heartily and as generously as you can, and we thank you for coming. When's our next meeting?
October 2nd, and it'll be Gary Lowe.
Gary Lowe will be our.
He's running for, what district is he running for?
13.